My parents took me to a nice restaurant on my 25th birthday to tell me I was adopted and cut me off. They didn't know I'd already found my birth family or that they were sitting 3 tables away. My mother smiled when she told me they'd only kept me for the benefits. I want you to understand what kind of smile it was. Not cruel exactly. Not the smile of someone who enjoys causing pain. It was the smile of someone completing a transaction they'd been anticipating for a long time. The small satisfaction of a person who has been waiting to close a file. Efficient. Resolved. We were at the nicest restaurant she'd ever taken me to. That should have been my first clue. Diane Mercer does not spend money on me without a reason printed somewhere on the receipt. She wore the gray cashmere she saved for funerals and difficult conversations that needed to look respectable. My father had booked the table under her name, not mine. There was no banner, no cake waiting in the back kitchen, no server approaching with a candle balanced on something chocolate. This was not a birthday dinner. It had the temperature of a deposition. I had been a paralegal at a trusts and estates firm for 3 years. I knew what a deposition felt like. I sat across the white tablecloth from my parents and understood, within the first 4 minutes, that I was the witness and they had prepared their questions. My mother folded her hands. She shifted into the voice, the one she used when she returned Christmas gifts, and explained to the customer service representative, in measured tones, why the item had not been practical, reasonable, final. "We've always done our very best for you," she said. "We gave you a roof, a good education, stability. We want you to know that." My father nodded along, a half second behind her the way he had nodded behind her for 30 years. Wesley Mercer was not a man who led. He was a man who confirmed. He was nodding now. My mother reached the slide she had been building toward. "There's something you should have been told a long time ago." She let it breathe. The pause of someone who has rehearsed the timing. "You're adopted." She watched my face. She had been waiting for this. The collapse. The reconfiguration. The moment her adopted daughter learned she had been a stranger at this table all along. "We only kept you," she said, leaning in, voice dropping to something almost gentle, "for the benefits." She smiled. My father slid papers across the white cloth. Already filed. I could see the court stamp in the upper right corner of the first page. The kind of stamp that tells you something has already been entered into a system and will require work to remove. I was out of the will. Out of everything. The language was clean and complete in the way of documents prepared by someone who does this professionally. Then my mother produced one more page. She uncapped a pen, her good pen, the one with the silver barrel, and laid it across the paper the way you lay silverware, like a small gift, like she was doing me a courtesy. "Just an acknowledgement that we've been transparent with you," she said. "Sign it and we can have a nice dinner. Order whatever you want." I read the first paragraph in approximately 4 seconds. "Because I am a paralegal at a trusts and estates firm, and I spend my days reading the quiet language that controls who receives what and when and under which conditions, and what you give up when you sign your name to something you haven't fully read." What my mother had handed me was not an acknowledgement. It was a waiver-wearing one, carefully dressed, designed to be signed in the fog of shock before the recipient understood what they were releasing. The language in paragraph 2, which most people would not reach before the pen was already moving, contained a clause releasing all claims against the estate of Ruth Mercer, my grandmother, and her successors and trustees. I left the pen where she had laid it. My mother's eyes moved to my hands, then to my face. I smiled back. And then I said nothing, because I had been carrying what I knew for 6 months, and I had learned, in 3 years of trusts and estates work, that the person who speaks first in a room where documents are on the table is almost never the person who wins. I had been a paralegal at Gentry & Holloway Estates for 3 years when I found the first thread. The firm handled mid to large estate matters, trusts, probate, asset transfers, the full range of what happens to things and money when people die, and the people they leave behind begin to understand what they were actually left. I was good at it in the way that people are good at things that align with a quality they were born with. I had always been precise. I had always noticed the detail that didn't fit. I had always been, in a way I didn't have language for until I started working in this field, a person who read the small print because the small print was where the actual story lived. My supervisor at Gentry & Holloway was a woman named Janet Pierce, 27 years in estate administration, a practicing attorney who ran our department with the methodical thoroughness of someone who understood that the difference between a clean estate settlement and a contested one was almost always a document that hadn't been read carefully enough. Janet had taught me in my first year that the most important sentence in any trust document was the one that specified what happened at the end, the termination clause, the moment the arrangement concluded and the assets moved to their final destination. I had read a lot of termination clauses. I had not read my own families. My parents were not people I had spent time analyzing professionally. Diane and Wesley Mercer were my parents, a fact I had absorbed as furniture absorbs the room around it, present and unexamined. My mother taught secondary school English, which explained the precision of her language and the way she weaponized clarity. My father managed a mid-level accounts portfolio at an insurance firm, which explained why he nodded behind her and left the structural decisions to someone else. They were not warm people. I want to be precise about this, because the story doesn't work if I present them as monsters, rather than as what they actually were. People who had made a transactional decision and lived inside it for 25 years without examining the cost to the person the transaction involved. I had been, for most of my childhood, the recipient of correct behavior without warmth, the roof, the education, the dental appointments, the school supplies, the birthday cakes that arrived on the right day without anyone singing particularly loudly. Everything provided, nothing given. I told myself this was simply their temperament. The first thread appeared 6 months before the restaurant. I had been working a routine estate matter, a straightforward trust distribution, the kind we handled 4 or 5 times a month, and had pulled a file that required me to cross-reference a family name against prior probate records. In doing so, I had accessed the county's public estate records through a database we subscribed to for exactly this purpose. I was looking for unrelated information. My grandmother's name appeared in a search result that had no reason to appear. Ruth Mercer Family Trust. Established 1998. Trustee, First Calder Bank and Trust. Beneficiary designations on file. I stopped. I had known my grandmother Ruth, my father's mother, as the woman who died when I was 11, who had smelled like lavender and kept peppermint candies in a dish by her chair, who had held my hand at the kitchen table and told me I had my father's eyes, which I now understood had been either a kindness or a confusion. I had not known she had a formal trust. I pulled the file. It was a 41-page document, and I read all 41 pages with the focused attention of someone who has learned that the sentence you need is always in the section you almost skipped. I found it on page 37. The caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall continue for the duration of the beneficiary's minority and shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the trust remainder shall pass in full to my granddaughter Paige. I read it twice, then I read it a third time in the deliberate way you read something when you are not yet willing to accept that it says what it says. My parents had been receiving monthly distributions from my grandmother's trust for raising me. The house on Clement Drive, the one I had grown up in, the one I had always understood as my parents' house, was funded by the trust. The distributions that had supplemented my father's insurance salary for 24 years. All of it structured as caregiver compensation for the beneficiary, me. And terminating, all of it, the distributions, the house subsidy, every payment, on my 25th birthday, which was in 6 months. I sat at my desk at Gentry and Holloway at 6:47 in the evening, after everyone else had gone home, and looked at page 37 until the office went dark around me. Then I turned on my desk lamp and kept looking at it. They had kept me. Not because of anything I was, or anything they felt, or any decision they had made about the kind of people they wanted to be. They had kept me because a trust document established in 1998 had made keeping me financially advantageous. I was not their daughter. I was their income stream, and in 6 months I would turn 25, and the income stream would terminate, and I would become, in the specific language my mother had not yet said out loud but that I could now read coming from a very long way away, no longer useful. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called the trustee's office the next morning and introduced myself as Paige Mercer, beneficiary of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust, and asked to schedule a meeting with the administrator. The trustee was a man named Gerald Park, 11 years at First Calder Bank and Trust, assigned to the Ruth Mercer account since its establishment, methodical in the way of people whose job is to keep exact records, and who understand that the records will outlast everyone involved. He met me in a conference room on a Wednesday morning. He had the file. He had the original trust document. He had 24 years of distribution records. He had been waiting, he told me, for me to come in. Your grandmother specified that the beneficiary should be informed of the trust's terms upon reaching adulthood, he said. We sent notification letters to the address of record at your 18th birthday, and again at 21. I looked at him. I never received them. He looked at me. The letters were signed for. My mother's signature, twice. I kept my face the way I kept my face during difficult client meetings. Attentive, neutral, processing. What happens, I said, if the caregiver parties attempt to contest the trust distribution to the named beneficiary at the time of termination? Gerald Park had been managing trusts for 11 years. He understood what I was actually asking. The trust is irrevocable, he said. The distribution schedule is fixed. The trustee, this office, distributes the remainder to the named beneficiary upon the trigger date, regardless of any subsequent actions by the caregiver parties. Their consent is not required. And if they have taken legal action in advance, I said, disinheritance filings, wills, their own will is entirely separate from Ruth Mercer's trust, he said. They can disinherit you from their estate. They cannot affect the trust. Those are two different instruments under two different authorities. I thought about my mother, somewhere across the city, preparing the papers she would slide across a restaurant table in 6 months. She had spent 6 months preparing the wrong weapon. I thanked Gerald Park and scheduled a follow-up appointment to complete the beneficiary verification paperwork. Then I went back to my office and did the other thing I had decided to do. I pulled my original birth certificate. I had found it in the bottom drawer of my parents' filing cabinet 3 years earlier, during a weekend home when they were away, while looking for a document I needed for a rental application. I had replaced it exactly as I found it. I had not examined it closely. Now I requested the certified copy from the County Vital Records Office, the copy I was legally entitled to as the person named on it, and I read it with the attention it deserved. My birth mother's name was Susan Hale. I had a name. I had a date. I had a county of birth that was 90 minutes from where I was sitting. I hired a researcher named Patricia Odom, 14 years in genealogical research and records recovery, a practice that specialized in adoption cases, and gave her everything I had. She called me 3 days later. Susan Hale had been 22 when I was born. She had kept looking for me. She had a daughter named Pearl and a son named Danny, both younger than me, both knowing they had a sister somewhere. Patricia gave me a phone number. I held my phone for a long time before I dialed. Susan answered on the second ring. I said, "My name is Paige. I think I'm your daughter." She made a sound I will not try to describe because I don't have accurate language for it, only the memory of holding the phone with both hands and understanding, for the first time, the specific grief of a woman who has been looking for something for 25 years and suddenly has it on the line. We talked for 2 hours. I met her the following Saturday. Susan and Pearl, who was 22 and studying nursing, and Danny, who was 19 and had my nose, which was the detail that undid me completely and privately in the car before I went inside. I did not tell my parents. I put the trust documents, my certified birth certificate, and the retainer agreement I signed with an estate attorney named Linda Cho, 19 years in trusts and contested estate matters, recommended by Janet Pierce as the most thorough practitioner she had personally encountered, into a manila folder. I carried it for 6 months. The dinner invitation told me when to open it. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. The morning my mother called to invite me to dinner, I did 3 things. First, I called Linda Cho and told her the timeline had arrived. She had the trust documents and the trustees' verified records. She had been ready for 3 months. Second, I called Gerald Park at First Calder Bank and Trust and confirmed that the trust distribution process would initiate on my birthday, regardless of any activity from the caregiver parties. He confirmed it. The trustee's office had already received my completed beneficiary verification. Everything was in order. Third, I called Susan. "They've called the meeting," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" "I need you to be at the restaurant," I said. "Table 9, 3 tables behind my mother's chair. I need you to be there the whole time and not approach until I stand up." "We'll be there," she said. "And Susan," I stopped. I had been practicing this sentence for weeks, and it still felt large. "I need you to know that what happens tonight with them isn't the reason I found you. I want you to know that." She was quiet again, in the way of someone receiving something they have been waiting a long time for. "I know, baby," she said. "I know." I put 3 pages in the folder, then I put on my good coat and drove to the restaurant. The dinner operated on their schedule for the first 12 minutes. My father ordered wine. My mother studied the menu with the focus of someone who intends to order the second least expensive entree to demonstrate restraint. I ordered the salmon because I was 25 years old and it was my birthday and I intended to eat well. The folder was in my bag. My father kept glancing at it. I watched the worry climb his neck in increments, a slow ascent, not fear yet, just the professional unease of an insurance man who has noticed a variable he hasn't accounted for. My mother ran her presentation with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has been in front of classrooms for 28 years and knows how to hold a room's attention. She built it in the correct order: the preamble about effort and sacrifice, the bridge about clarity and honesty, the arrival at the point. Adopted. Benefits? Not useful. The pen laid across the paper like silverware. I read the first paragraph in 4 seconds. I left the pen. I let the silence sit, because silence in a room where documents are on the table is a tool, and I have learned to use it. My father said, "Is there something we should know?" "Not yet," I said. My mother moved to close the deal. She reached for the pen and held it out to me. A more direct offer this time. The impatience of someone whose script has not produced the expected response at the expected beat. I opened my folder. No flourish, no speech, no version of the scene I had imagined in the 6 months I'd been carrying this. 3 pages, laid on the white tablecloth, side by side, squared to the edge. The retainer agreement with Linda Cho's firm at the top, so that the name of an estate attorney would be the first thing my mother read. The trust distribution schedule from Gerald Park's office, page 37 highlighted in yellow. And my original birth certificate, certified copy, with Susan Hale's name in the field where my mother had spent 25 years assuming her own name belonged. My mother's eyes went to the trust schedule immediately. She was, in the end, her mother's daughter in at least one way. She knew which document mattered most. I watched her read it. The caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. The color left her face from the top down. Not a flush, not a blanch, a specific draining, like a window shade being drawn from the top of the frame. Slow, complete. My father leaned to read over her shoulder. His face did the same thing, with a 2-second delay. "This is," my mother started. "Irrevocable," I said. "Gerald Park at First Calder Bank and Trust can explain the mechanics, but the short version is that Nana Ruth's trust distributes to me on my birthday, regardless of any filings you've made against your own estate. Your will and her trust are 2 different instruments. Linda Cho's office has been in contact with the trustee for 3 months. My mother's mouth was open. I had never, in 25 years, seen my mother's mouth open without a sentence coming out of it. "Mom," I said quietly, "you filed against the wrong family. The one you cut me out of was always the smaller one." She closed her mouth, then opened it again. "You can't, the trust doesn't, Wesley, tell her she's wrong." My father had nothing to offer. He was looking at the highlighted text on page 37, with the expression of a man who has spent 30 years assessing risk, and has just encountered a liability he did not see in the policy. "Sit down," my mother said, and I realized I had stood up without noticing. "Where do you think you're going? We're in the middle of a conversation." I looked at her for a moment, one final look, across a white tablecloth, in the nicest restaurant she'd ever taken me to. "My birth family is sitting 3 tables behind you," I said. She began began very slowly to turn around. Table 9 was visible from where she sat. It had been visible the entire evening. Susan and Pearl and Danny, who had been there since before my parents arrived, who had watched my mother deliver the worst sentences of my life across a restaurant and had kept their seats because I had asked them to let me come to them. Susan met my mother's eyes. She did not glare. She did not perform anything. She simply looked at the woman who had raised her daughter for 25 years for a monthly distribution from a trust, with the clear, steady gaze of someone who has been waiting a long time and has learned in that waiting the difference between urgency and certainty. Then she looked at me and pulled out the empty fourth chair. "We saved you a seat," she said. "We always did. I will tell you what happened after, in the way things actually happen, imperfectly, slowly, with the full texture of real life rather than the clean resolution of a story someone designed. The trust distribution processed on my birthday, 7 days after the restaurant. Gerald Park's office had been precise and thorough, as Gerald Park's office had been for 24 years. The remainder of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust transferred to me in full. Linda Cho reviewed the transfer documents and confirmed they were clean. The amount was larger than I had calculated because I had not accounted for 2 decades of investment growth on the trust principal. Linda called me with the final number on a Tuesday morning, and I wrote it down and then sat at my kitchen table and looked at what I had written for a long time. My parents filed a challenge to the trust distribution through their own attorney, a man named Kenneth Ferris who had been handling their legal matters for years and who, Linda told me, had called her the week after the restaurant to discuss the situation and had seemed, in Linda's assessment, deeply unhappy to have been retained for this particular challenge. The challenge was dismissed 4 weeks later. Irrevocable trusts are difficult to contest without grounds that simply did not exist here. Gerald Park's records were 24 years of documentation. Linda had prepared for this in the 3 months she'd been ready. The dismissal was, in the specific language of the court order, without prejudice to any future claims, which is the court's way of saying, there is nothing here. My mother called me once after the restaurant. She did not apologize. She said that things had been handled badly and that she hoped I would consider the full picture. I said I had been considering the full picture for 6 months and that I understood it clearly. I wished her well. I have not heard from her since, which is, I believe, the outcome we are both most suited to. Susan and Pearl and Danny came to my apartment on my birthday, the Saturday after, the one that felt like the real celebration. Susan brought a cake, an actual cake, yellow with white icing, with Paige written across it in blue letters. Pearl and Danny had gotten me gifts that required knowledge of who I actually was. Pearl had found a book I'd mentioned once in our second conversation, and Danny had made me a playlist. I sat at the kitchen table with the 3 of them and ate cake on my birthday for the first time in years that felt like it meant something. Susan had a photo. She'd carried it for 25 years in the front pocket of a journal she'd kept since I was born. A hospital photo, the kind that's taken in the first hours. A small person in a white blanket, eyes closed, unaware. She set it on the table in front of me. "I looked for you," she said. "I want you to know I always looked." I looked at the photo for a while, at the small person who had not yet been handed to Diane and Wesley Mercer, who had not yet become useful to anyone, who was simply a person who had arrived and was waiting to find out who she belonged to. "I know," I said. "I found the records." She nodded. "Patricia is thorough. The best," I said. We stayed at the table until the cake was gone. My therapist, Dr. Vanessa Obi, 6 years in practice, a specialty in identity reconstruction following family systems disruption, which is the clinical way of saying what happens to people who find out their origin story was different than they were told, asked me in our 3rd session what I wanted the restaurant story to mean. I thought about it honestly. "I don't want it to mean that I won," I said. "I didn't go there to win. I went there because they had called the meeting and I had the documents and it was time." "What was it time for?" she said. I thought about Susan at table 9, pulling out the 4th chair. "It was time to go sit down," I said. Dr. Obi nodded. "With the people who saved you a seat," she said. "With the people who saved me a seat," I said. "Yes. There is one last thing I want to tell you, because I think it is the most true part of this story and the part that took me the longest to understand. My grandmother Ruth established that trust in 1998, when I was 2 years old. She designated me as the remainder beneficiary. She arranged for the distributions to support my upbringing. She set the termination date at my 25th birthday, old enough, she must have calculated, for me to have the resources to build my own life with. She had also, according to Gerald Park, made one other specification in the trust's administrative notes. She had instructed the trustee to retain the birth certificate, my original birth certificate, Susan's name on it, on file at First Calder Bank and Trust for 24 years. She wanted to make sure, Gerald Park told me when I asked about it, that you would always be able to find your way back. My grandmother Ruth had died when I was 11. She had smelled like lavender and kept peppermint candies in a dish. She had held my hand at her kitchen table and told me I had my father's eyes, my biological father's eyes. I understood now. And she had built a legal instrument designed to protect me and sustain me and leave me with the means to be free. She had also made sure the name was on file so that I could find Susan, so that I could come to them. I carry that. I carry it the way some people carry a carved bird or a lyric sheet or a set of books that never lie. I carry it in the knowledge that someone who loved me had looked ahead and left me the map. I just had to be in the right field to read it.